been here before, thank you for your repeat performance. For those of you who have not been here before, let me tell you just a little bit about us. My name is Steve Highsmith. I'm Vice President of Institutional Advancement. I'm also an alum of Cabrini. Radnor Township is very proud of its impact on higher education in the region, nation, and world, and Cabrini is a part of that. And Cabrini is part of a worldwide mission. We are a Catholic liberal arts institution, welcoming to all peoples, and focused on the education of the heart. We focus on academic excellence, on leadership, and on social justice. Our student population is among the most diverse in higher education in the nation. Money Magazine recently named Cabrini University the 38th most transformative university in higher education in the United States. For the next hour, we will hear the Democratic and Republican Party candidates for Delaware County District Attorney as Election Day nears very rapidly. For those of you who are very much involved with the future of your communities, thank you for your involvement and for encouraging people to get involved in November. Our format is to alternate questions after opening statements. I will include along the way the written questions that I've received from the audience, and they're all very good questions. Thank you. The candidates will get a minute to answer after their 2-minute opening remarks. We will give them a little card warning that they're getting close to the end of time. I believe we'll give them a 15-second yellow card, which means wrap it up. And then if they will each get the same question. Obviously, there are some questions that may be tailored more to one than another from a political standpoint, and that's fine. We will try to rephrase those questions in a way that also works for the other candidate. They can ask 3 times for a 30-second extension. And they call them chits. And they can do that, but not going to add them all up. Don't get 90 seconds of extra time in one answer. But you can get a little bit more if you really feel you need it 3 times. The moderator reserves the right to follow up for clarity or to allow a response for another candidate. Each candidate will get a chance to respond to the same question as it applies to them. Clarity and brevity are our friends this evening. Audience, please put your questions, if you have any more, on cards, and we will endeavor to get to them. I can tell you that all the questions that have been given to me to date would take up more than an hour, and that's really wonderful. Please refrain from waving any signs or for cheering too wildly or enthusiastically. We allow you to do that, pleasantly allow you, at the beginning and at the end. Again, applause takes up time for talking. And with that, we would like you to welcome the candidates who are here. Will you please give a warm welcome to our 2 candidates for District Attorney from Delaware County. There's this thing called the internet, and they have tons of information about each of them, so I'm not going to go through their bios to save time for an hour. Incumbent Republican District Attorney Katayun Copeland is here, and Democrat candidate Jack Stolzheimer. Thank you both for being here. As many years of experience as assistant DAs and as assistant U.S. attorneys, they have certainly earned the law enforcement credentials to be running for office, and we respect the fact that they have been doing so earnestly and intensely. Time now for opening statements. And as determined by a coin toss, Kat Copeland gets to go first. DA Copeland, will you please begin with your opening remarks?
Thank you, Steve. Thank you to Cabrini University for hosting this, and thank you to Steve for being their gracious moderator. My name is Katayun Copeland, also known as Kat. I'm a district attorney here in Delaware County, Pennsylvania, and it's my honor to be so. I have been a prosecutor for my entire adult career. That is 27 years. And it has been my honor and my privilege to represent our communities and, most importantly, our victims here in Delaware County. I began my career in 1992 as a young assistant district attorney right out of law school, and I chose this career path thanks to my parents. My mom is Iranian. My father, before he passed away, was American. And I was born here and grew up in Iran for a large amount of time, of part of my childhood. That helped form who I am and what is important to me as a prosecutor. I lived in Iran during a time during which it was peaceful, and I lived in Iran during a revolution where there was martial law, where literally I could hear gunfire across the streets, where I heard daily "Death to America" being chanted in the middle of revolution. And it gave me a level of appreciation for the peacefulness we have here in the United States. I love what I do. When I began my career as a young ADA, my heart opened to the violence and that occurred within our community, and more importantly, to our victims. I rose through the office for 19 years, ultimately becoming a deputy district attorney and chief in charge of drugs, intelligence, terrorism, and forfeitures at the DA's office, working under several DAs. I learned from each one of them. Most importantly, I prosecute every kind of case that you could possibly imagine: murderers, robbers, drug traffickers, rapists, child predators, and those who abuse our senior citizens. I have since shown day in and day out what I can do as district attorney.
Thank you very much. Mr. Stolzheimer, your 2 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. I am Jack Stolzheimer, the Democratic nominee for District Attorney of Delaware County. My opponent and her Republican allies have been spending hundreds of thousands of dollars in negative, misleading ads to make you fear me. So let me tell you tonight who I am so you can make your own decisions. I am very proud to be the father of 2 beautiful children. Unfortunately, they're teenagers, so there's no way they're hanging out with Dad at a debate on a Sunday night. But together we are living our American dream right here in Delaware County. My mother came to this country as a 15-year-old immigrant refugee from a Nazi slave labor camp. My father was born and raised in Upper Darby, dropped out of high school when he was 17 years old to join the Army during the Korean War, and was able to raise our family out of poverty and into the middle class through a union job. That's why I'm so proud to be the candidate endorsed by the AFL-CIO, our local teachers union, and a host of other unions right here in Delaware County. I was raised to be a Delco guy. I started my education at Toby Farms Elementary School, graduated from Ridley Senior High, and lived for the last 15 years with my wife and our kids in Havertown. Inspired by my parents, I've devoted most of my life to public service, including 7 years I spent as a prosecutor, both in Delaware County and as a federal prosecutor throughout the Eastern District of Pennsylvania. And that's why I'm running for district attorney, because I want to put my experience to work for you. I want to protect our communities from violent crime. I want to stand up and protect workers who are being exploited by unscrupulous employers. I want to keep my kids and your kids safe from senseless gun violence. And I want to end the era of Republican corruption in the media courthouse. It's time for a change. That's why I'm running, and that's why I'm so proud to be running as a Democrat. Steve, I appreciate your stepping up and moderating this debate. I want to thank Cabrini University for doing it. I want to thank Kat for agreeing to it, and I look forward to debating the issues tonight.
Thank you. We follow now in order of alternating questions, and we begin with D.A. Copeland with the first question, but it will go to each of them 1 minute to answer. You each, in your opening remarks, have touched on this, but I'd like you to get, please, if you can, a little more specific about one instance in your life or one event or person in your life, no matter what it is, especially if small, that informs how you would make decisions as district attorney, informs your beliefs related to what you believe a district attorney must emphasize now in these times.
My experience as a prosecutor over the course of 27 years experience tells me what I should focus on and what I have been focusing on ever since I have taken office. I have had the chance to meet with numerous victims day in and day out as a prosecutor and stood as their voice in our courtrooms. To me, seeking justice is the role of the prosecutor, and that is a role that I take with great gravity and a serious amount of gravitas, if you will. I recognize that fairness and justice is what our courtrooms are about. And standing side by so many of our victims, I recognize that our courtrooms are but one voice, one location where we serve justice. As a district attorney, I recognize that part of my role isn't just to do so in our courtrooms, but as preventative efforts on our streets. And so I've undertaken numerous projects and initiatives to help prevent violence here in Delaware County and have stood for that here as a prosecutor, most importantly as the district attorney of Delaware County.
Mr. Stolzheimer, is there one event or a story you could tell us that tells us something about what you think needs to be emphasized more than anything else and what informs your decision-making?
Sure. The most important event in my life was the day my 2 children were born. They're twins, boy-girl twins. I'm really lucky, very efficient. But they've changed my life dramatically. They have made me believe even more in the value of community. We all know that it does really take a village to raise an individual. All of us together collectively are in the same situation in this society. I believe that all of us are enriched when each of us has the opportunity to reach their full human potential. And I also believe that one of the roles of government is to help everybody get to that place. Having seen my children grow up and seeing how frail and how much I wanted to hold them and stop the world from touching them, but I also have come to realize that they are part of a larger society. And so I want to get up every day and make sure that my kids are safe, your kids are safe, and that everybody has the same opportunity for justice in America.
Mr. Stolzheimer, you get the second question to begin. You want to reform the cash bail system in Delaware County, but if successful, it would likely lead, some say, to more accused criminals out on bail. Doesn't mean that they're guilty, but it means that they are accused, and more would then get out on bail. Why would that not likely lead to more crime?
Because that's a false question. My cash bail plan is to take the 27% of people who are in our privately run prison every day, who are there simply because they can't afford the bail that's been set for them, meaning that the criminal justice system has determined that they should be out on release pending their charges, but they're held incarcerated simply because they're poor. What I want to do very simply is look at the best practices. The U.S. Department of Justice has studied cash bail reform. One of my heroes, Robert F. Kennedy, began bail reform back in the 1960s. It's been an ongoing crisis in the criminal justice system. And what I want to do, looking at the best practices from around the country, is have a due process hearing within the first 72 hours that person has failed to post bail. If we do that, we can be just to everybody and keep our streets safe.
D.A. Copeland, do you believe that the current bail system is just to everybody? And if not, how would you reform it?
I believe our cash bail system could do with a measure of reform. I have seen what has occurred in California when there was a repeal of the cash bail system, however. And I think that they compare the algorithm that they created in this risk assessment program a little bit to the film Minority Report, if any of you have seen that. And essentially what it does is it looks at the risk assessment, and it gives absolutely no discretion to the judge to consider factors that aren't considered within that algorithm. And the ACLU has actually come out against it and has indicated it is a system that they don't support because it is, at its very essence, some measure of racism within that algorithm. I do believe, however, that the cash system could do with a measure of reform, including perhaps notifying our individuals instead of placing cash bail on low-level nonviolent offenders, giving them a notification beforehand as to when their preliminary hearings are scheduled. That would, by definition, reduce people who actually are in prison. It would also help reduce warrants, which are actually come into existence.
Ms. Copeland, Republicans have run the DA's office in Delaware County pretty much since there's been a DA's office, right? Crime rates in some communities, however, in Delaware County are among the highest in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Why is that not a failure of Republican-led law enforcement?
I can tell you that I, for my entire life, have been a prosecutor. What I do is not led nor dictated by politics. I have never run for office. I have never considered running for office, as contrary to what my opponent has done. My opponent has run or talked about running or discussed running for office on various levels 6 separate times. The district attorney's office has nothing to do with being Republican. Under my governance, what we do day in and day out is we pursue justice in our halls. Since I've taken office, I have hired 2 assistant district attorneys. I looked into neither of those backgrounds. I assumed from one of them, from the suggestions on his references on his application, that he is not a Republican. He has been hired because he is the most qualified candidate, which is the only thing I care about as a prosecutor.
Just to follow up, if I may, but Republicans and Democrats run, and the parties get behind them. And so if it doesn't matter, it doesn't matter. But if it matters, and the Republicans have been in charge, is there something unique about Republican leadership that makes them better in law enforcement, or is it a neutral? You're saying look at each individual. My suggestion is to everybody is to look at each individual. I am a Republican. By definition, running for an office requires some measure of support. And I'm proud to be a Republican. Running the DA's office, however, has absolutely nothing to do with politics. Mr. Stolzheimer, will you please take that same question but reverse it? If indeed the problems of law enforcement are difficult and crime are so difficult, is it wrong to be able to look at a party and say they should be doing better or worse?
No, I don't think it's wrong to look at the people who have been running this county for 140 years and determine whether or not they're doing what's right for the people of Delaware County. I do want to take issue with one thing my opponent has said. She keeps saying I ran for office 6 times. It's absolutely untrue. It's one of her many lies. She's counting every time somebody actually talked about my name, not whether I actually talked about running for an office. It's just completely nonsense. The second thing I want to say is she talked about hiring a Democrat. That's an amazing admission for her, because I want to tell you, what she won't tell you is this. Until today, 100% of the assistant district attorneys in Delaware County have been registered Republicans. And the reason that's true is because she doesn't make all the hiring decisions. The DA's office has been and continues to be a hiring hall for the friends and family of Republicans who are leaders in this county. We have to stop that. We have to have a district attorney's office that doesn't hire people because of their partisan preference. And I do want to, if you don't mind, I want to take my 30-second chit here. I would also say that, under her administration of this office, it's become a political arm of the Republican Party. 5 current assistant district attorneys are local office holders. 3 more are running this year. Of course, all as Republicans because they're all registered Republicans. She also has 15 members of her senior staff who are double dipping. They're doing private legal practice on county time. The reason she looks the other way is because they're all campaign contributors to her campaign. This is why we need change in Delaware County.
If I may, I'm going to let you respond. Whenever someone says someone lies, that's something that we would all like to have a chance to have a say back at, one way or the other. Ms. Copeland, would you please respond to that?
Thank you. Contrary to what my opponent has indicated, every single person in my office is a hardworking prosecutor. Most importantly, the individuals who actually work second and sometimes third jobs do so because they are low paying. And perhaps Jack would know nothing about that given what he earns currently and what he beforehand earned rather as Deputy Treasury Department. Most importantly, do you think many people here in Delaware County have second and third jobs? So do my prosecutors. The starting salary for a young individual coming out of law school is $91,000 to $115,000 as a criminal defense attorney. The starting salary in my office is $35,000. Think about how low that is. And most importantly, the fact that they have second and third jobs only tells us they are dedicated and they care about their community members.
Thank you very much. Let's move on to another question now, and this has to do with prisons and the privatization of them, the George Hill Correctional Facility. Would you seek to end, Mr. Stolzheimer, the private prison operation in the county, and if so, why?
Absolutely, and I've been trying to do that for the last 2 years with some level of success, thanks to the 2 Democrats who were elected to county council in 2017, and we will finish the job with the 3 Democrats who are going to be elected on November 5th. The reason we're against the private prison is 1, because it's immoral, and 2, because it's an absolutely bad deal for taxpayers. The way the private company that runs that prison makes money is to hold the maximum number of people for the longest period of time. These are all low-level offenders. It's a county jail, after all. So you, as a taxpayer, have an interest in keeping the least number of people incarcerated for the least amount of time. We need to have services that are here for our returning citizens. We need a reentry program that we could build with the $2 to $3 million that is leaving our county every year through the profits that the GEO Group is making for running this private prison. It's time for a change. We're going to bring that when we win Delaware County Council.
D.A. Copeland, your view on that?
Thank you. I recognize as district attorney that the jurisdiction of the prison is not under the control of the district attorney. My focus is about security. My focus is about transparency, and my focus as a district attorney about programs that we actually have within the prison to help reduce recidivism rate, to actually help individuals overcome substance use disorder, and to help them get back on their feet. Having said that, I'm in favor of the new jail oversight board, which has been placed in place by our county council, unanimously so, as I recall. And most importantly, if, however, at some point in time they elect and they choose to end the contract with GEO, then what I encourage them to do is to actually look at what matters, which is continuing the programs that are currently in place. The wellness programs, the restoring individuals to competency while out on bail, and the recidivism programs, which help people overcome substance use disorder. Those are things that I recognize are within the control of the district attorney.
Thank you. I'd like to go on to the issue of gun violence in the county. And there are 2 or 3 questions that are in this question, and if you could try to address each one, because 1 or 2 of them are yes or no questions. Do you endorse efforts to ban semi-automatic weapons, often referred to in the public as assault weapons, and how would you impact handgun violence in the county? And D.A. Copeland, will you begin, please?
I am in favor of gun legislation, sensible gun legislation reform, as I have already come out on numerous occasions in the past. I have stood by our victims and our victim advocates and gun reform advocates in favor of that legislation that has been for banning bump stocks, that has been for universal firearms checks, that has been for things like permanent PFAs and encouraging people to actually give their firearms to law enforcement, which is now mandated under the law. And most importantly, some new proposed legislation with respect to banning semi-automatic weapons. I assume you mean assault weapons. I don't believe that they belong in hands of you and I. I believe they are, for a very good reason, in the hands of law enforcement individuals. However, those are the kinds of things that I recognize matter, and I have consistently stood for and called for as a prosecutor here in Delaware County and as district attorney, which I can impact.
So to be clear, you're in favor of a ban on semi-automatic assault rifles, the AR-15, things like that?
Things like that, correct.
Mr. Stolzheimer, the same question to you. If you need me to repeat it, I can.
Sure. No, I'm sort of amazed to hear that Kat has been consistently for an assault weapon ban, because when she was at a gun violence town hall called by Senator Carney just a couple weeks ago in August, actually, she said she wouldn't take a position on any legislation because DAs don't legislate. Now, because Charlie Sexton, the former GOP leader of Springfield Township, has come out for an assault weapon ban, I think Kat realizes the political winds are beginning to change. I have long been for an assault weapon ban. I think we also need to get rid of bump stocks and ammunition clips that are part of the same problem. As to firearms, that's exactly what I did in the U.S. Attorney's Office. I spent 4.5 years building a program called Project Safe Neighborhoods, where we took a holistic approach to reducing gun violence throughout the Eastern District of Pennsylvania. I want to bring that same kind of mentality and the same focus to a focused deterrence program right here in Delaware County to end the gun violence.
It's not likely to happen, but I'd like to ask this question and just get a yes or no answer from each of you, starting with you, Mr. Stolzheimer. Would you enforce a mandatory buyback law of any type?
So the only mandatory buyback law I would think would be done at the federal level.
And would you support that?
Well, personally, I don't think that that's a good use of law enforcement's time. I also think that there are...
Ms. Copeland, how do you feel about that? Mandatory gun buyback law.
I don't think that I would sit down there and suggest that we should, as the district attorney's office, be requiring people to actually hand their guns in. I am and have created programs which have offered to buy guns back and have sought funding to do so, but not by giving people money, but actually by giving people cards, which are gift cards.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you. For both of you now, Ms. Copeland, will you start this, please? Would you look to modify sentences of convicted child predators? And if so, under what circumstances? Question from the audience.
Modify how?
Modify the sentences of convicted child predators. I think trying to get a sense of how you feel where we are today in dealing with sex offenders.
When you look at today's sentencing guidelines, it is so incredibly sad to see that many child molesters and individuals who create child pornographers here at our state level have faced guidelines that are even less than drug traffickers. It's disappointing. So as a result, people, you as a community see that sometimes sentences are extremely low. And that's dictated by our sentencing guidelines here in Pennsylvania. I believe that our sentences in these kinds of offenses need to increase. They need to increase significantly. Currently, at the federal level, when you look at those kinds of sentences, there are individuals who are creating and disseminating child pornography are looking at sentences of 15, sometimes 20 years. I'm not suggesting we go to that extent. There are individuals who are doing that, who are doing thousands and thousands of images and victimizing hundreds and hundreds of children. But I do believe we should have an increased punishment for individuals who are participating in child pornography and child sex crimes.
So your modification is to go up. Mr. Stolzheimer, how do you approach this?
You're asking, the question is whether or not I would be in favor of lowering?
No. Well, it says, would you look to modify sentences of convicted child predators, and if so, under what circumstances?
Well, the question's a little amorphous. I'm not sure if they're talking about a particular individual, but in general, I would agree with the district attorney that, the sentencing guideline, it's a decision made by the Sentencing Commission and the legislature.
Very good. And we'll start this next one with you. This is a rising time for women candidates. Mr. Stolzheimer, should your gender or your opponent's gender be a deciding factor in the race, and why or why not?
I certainly hope my gender nor my lack of height is a deciding factor in this race, but I don't think there's much more to say.
Well, I think the source of this is likely we have a rising tide of equality and equal opportunity that has been happening for decades, from the late 1960s, early 70s, in that next spawning of women's liberation. And today, with a lot of women candidates and more becoming elected, and there are some people who say, I'm just going to check that box right now because it's time. How would you say that, even to a Democrat or an independent that might ordinarily vote Democratic? How do you respond to them?
I think most voters make a determination if they have information about the election based on the qualities of the candidates. I will say that I'm an ardent feminist because I have a 13-year-old daughter. So if she happens to be listening or gets a recording of this, I want to see her given every equal opportunity. In fact, even more than equal opportunity. Women have their due. It's their time. I think women being involved in politics is a great thing. It's changed the whole tenor of debate in the American political system over the last 50 to 60 years. So I hope that answers your question.
I think it does. Ms. Copeland, how do you respond to that as a woman running for office and what you've gone through in life, and how you want to be perceived now by a voter?
I have, for over 20 years, walked through the hallways of my office and seen the pictures of the DAs who came before me from the 1700s. And they look like Jack. Not one of them was elected by our electorate who look like me. Having said that, I don't believe people should elect a district attorney based upon the fact that they are a woman or a man or anything for that matter. What matters to me is that people look at your qualifications. And if you look at my qualifications and my experience, that speaks volumes. You shouldn't vote for me because I'm a woman. You should vote for me because I am the best qualified, experienced candidate.
Next question is another one from the audience. The Heroin Task Force was formed in 2012 to reduce opioid deaths. Since then, deaths have continued to skyrocket. Do you plan to keep the Heroin Task Force? Mr. Stolzheimer.
Well, the Heroin Task Force in Delaware County has the distinct history of having never actually arrested anybody or done any single operation to arrest the opioid or heroin problem in Delaware County. It's actually been formed to be a public relations exercise for the district attorney to run around the county and say she's doing something about a problem when she's actually not. We need to have a county health department take the lead on the opioid crisis in Delaware County. We're one of the largest counties. Thank you. From my experience in 20-some years of government, I know that we are one of the largest counties in the country that doesn't have a health department, and that we have to break down the silos between public health and law enforcement and have them work together. So we need a county health department. They need to run the Heroin Task Force, take it out of politics so that she doesn't spend her time at 69th Street greeting voters 20 days out from Election Day with county detectives in tow, who she's paying overtime to.
Ms. Copeland, will you please respond both to the question and obviously you were mentioned in there a couple of times.
Thank you. The Heroin Task Force doesn't arrest people. That's correct. That's what law enforcement is for. And the role of the Heroin Task Force is to educate and to bring together different members of the community, including the district attorney, who is the chief law enforcement officer of the county. That would be me. As such, I recognize that it is part of my role to lead this in January of 2018. What I have done is focus on distributing Narcan. That has been done since day one, not in the last 20 days or 30 days here in the DA's office. Most importantly, the Heroin Task Force has accomplished some amazing things. As a result of the efforts, we continue to face problems here in Delaware County, like everywhere they do in the United States. But thanks to our efforts, this is the very first year that opioid overdose deaths and drug overdose deaths have gone down. Opioid overdose deaths alone have gone down by 27%, and far be it from me to not credit the task force, which is comprised of many members, for doing so.
Thank you. If we could hold the applause, please. That's well earned, I know, but if you please hold it for both candidates. In some cities and counties, D.A. Copeland, such as Philadelphia, Democrats elected to district attorney have begun taking an aggressive stand not to enforce certain laws aggressively or to make decisions that lead to the release of incarcerated persons, and doing these things because they believe that there are obvious inequities in the system, including those caused by racism in the system, that led to tougher penalties for Black Americans and other people of color. If elected, would you be sensitive to that kind of movement, or do you believe that's the wrong movement?
I don't believe that following in the footsteps of Larry Krasner is ever going to be the right approach or the right stance. I believe that every single day, minorities in our criminal justice system face large hurdles, and I'm very cognizant of that as an individual who is herself a minority here in our county. Most importantly, however, I recognize that here as a chief law enforcement officer, our role and my role as district attorney is to enforce the laws, not to do so selectively or based upon race, creed, gender, or anything like that. Larry Krasner, as the district attorney of Delaware County, has in fact done the opposite of what his role is as DA. What his role should be. He has consistently not notified victims of what they are entitled to know under the law and under statutory requirement. I will never follow in those footsteps.
All right, Mr. Stolzheimer, will you please take the same question? Are you more inclined to follow that newer Democratic lead? And if so, you're certainly aware of the allegations that would lead to more crime on the streets?
Yeah, so there are district attorneys, both Republican and Democrats, who are getting elected all over this country, who know that as the chief law enforcement officer, they have to be fair to everybody. Our criminal justice system has to be fair to everybody. And by just continuously locking people up for small drug possessionary offenses, we're not actually keeping our communities safer. So what I have done and what I've offered to do is to take a look at the marijuana area of drug trafficking in Delaware County, not drug trafficking, but drug possession. In 2016, the last time we have statistics, of the 3,000 people who were arrested in Delaware County for possessing a small amount of marijuana for personal use, 59% of them were African American. The African American population of Delaware County is 22%. That's wrong. That's racist, and we've got to stop it. We also are on the path to legalization of marijuana in this Commonwealth. The governor's for it, the lieutenant governor's for it, the attorney general's for it, and as soon as New York and New Jersey legalize it, the legislature is going to be for it. We have to get smarter about the way we go after drug crimes.
Let me follow up with that, if I may. So, D.A. Copeland, do you have a similar plan for, do you recognize this wave that's going on and also the reality of the disproportionate amount of arrests in the Black community? How do you deal with that?
When our law enforcement officers here in Delaware County look to see who has committed crimes, they don't look to see what individuals' races are. I have confidence in them. Most importantly, what I recognize is that if we are headed towards the wave of legalization, if you will, or decriminalization, which are two vastly different things, then we need to look at that as a country as a whole. more importantly, as a Commonwealth, I recognize that that is not a decision that's made by the DA. That is apparently not recognized by my opponent, who has consistently gone across the county and talked about reducing it down to a summary offense. There is simply no crime here in Pennsylvania, in our Commonwealth, which reduces it to a summary offense. You have to actually be a prosecutor to understand and know those facts, however. Recognizing that, nonetheless, I recognize that medical marijuana is something that occurs here in Delaware County, and I'm excited about that new legislation which is passed. I'd like to see where that takes us as a community as a whole and study its results before we jump to that next point.
Ms. Copeland, as district attorney, do you believe that federal policies cracking down on undocumented residents creates a climate in Delaware County where some victims of crime may be reluctant to come forward for fear of arrest, breakup of the family, and/or deportation by the federal government?
As the daughter of a woman who is Iranian, as the daughter of a father who was unjustly imprisoned in Iran and charged with being a CIA spy in Islamic Republic of Iran, where my mother had to actually represent him despite having absolutely no legal training, I have an appreciation for individuals who are charged with crimes unjustly so. I haven't seen here in Delaware County, more importantly, the idea of individuals who have had issues with respect to being victims who haven't come forward. We encourage our victims to come forward and communicate with us directly. And I have specifically, personally, supported visas for individuals who are undocumented individuals and supported visas for them to become United States citizens when they are victims of crime. So our hearts are open to our victims, and we encourage them to come forward, and we will make sure we take a protective stance to make sure that their voices are heard in our courtrooms.
Mr. Stolzheimer, we take the same question, please.
Sure. Unfortunately, in this time in our country's history, we have a president who is racist and is using the immigration issue as a wedge to beat up on people who are defenseless, and is actually limiting and hurting the public safety of our communities across this country by his politicization of immigration issue, and particularly his politicization of the use of the ICE agency. So my position would be very simply that we need to support everybody. Everybody who lives in our community is entitled to the protections of the Fourth Amendment, and they're entitled to feel safe when they want to go to a police officer. We want Delaware County, the diverse county that it is, because my mother came from the Ukraine as a refugee after living homeless on the streets of Germany. I know something about this too. We want everybody to feel comfortable and coming to police officers, and to be able to come and get justice fairly and equally, no matter their status. And we will not back down. We will give everybody Fourth Amendment protections when I'm the District Attorney of Delaware County.
To each of you, beginning with you, Mr. Stolzheimer, explain how you're your own person, that you are accountable and a leader when, in elections today, it's well known that you need money to get elected, other people's money, and these people may come from outside Delaware County. So this is a question for both of you and for those parties. How can you assure this audience that you are accountable, you are a leader, you're not influenced by other people's money?
Well, people know me. I live in this county. I've lived here for 50 years. I've been in public service. I was a federal prosecutor long before Kat Copeland was a federal prosecutor. I know people in this community well, and I know that I have done leadership. I've been a deputy state treasurer. You know who I am. You know where I will be. My heart is in Delaware County, and I will always put the interest of Delaware County residents first, and to protect this precious, diverse community that we all live in and that we call Delco.
DA Copeland, how can you assure this audience that you too are not influenced by what may appear to others to simply be the necessities of running for office?
I have shown for 27 years, 19 years as a prosecutor, as a young deputy district attorney. I've shown for 6 years, far more than my opponent, what I have been doing and what I will continue to do. For the last 2 years, almost 2 years as DA, I have taken strong stances on what I believe is important. on keeping our senior citizens safe from crime, on keeping our school children safe from violence, on keeping violence at bay and guns out of the hands of those who don't belong. They shouldn't be in their hands. Most importantly, I haven't accepted money from large-scale billionaire financiers who have an agenda, and that agenda is ever so clear. By every time you look at the Philadelphia District Attorney, Larry Krasner, now George Soros has chosen to finance Mr. Stolzheimer's campaign. That should speak volumes.
I get a rebuttal. George Soros has not financed my campaign. My campaign has been financed by individual donors and labor unions who represent working people here in Delaware County. Her campaign of lies and false negative attacks, because she doesn't have anything positive to say about the 2 years she's been district attorney, has been financed by a dark money pack out of Washington, D.C., run by Trump people. That's who she is, that's who's behind her, and that's the truth.
Ms. Copeland, will you please respond?
I don't have any idea. I recognize the fact that there are ads that are coming across. They're telling you about Jack and his background. Most importantly, I don't know who those people are or where that money comes from. What I do know is that there are clearly individuals who recognize the fact that George Soros has invested money in Jack Stolzheimer's campaign, and they aren't interested in Delaware County become yet another Philadelphia where crime has risen, where homicides have risen by 12%, and where victims.
All right. I'm sorry. Did you have nothing to add to
Where
that?
victims don't have a voice.
All right. I'm sorry. Did you have one more thing to say?
Sure.
Yeah.
Her dark money pack started running ads that are...
Well, but what...
Her dark money pack has been running negative slander...
Can you two agree that if either of your campaigns were to coordinate with the PAC, it would be illegal? Yes. Right?
Absolutely.
So you're both saying you don't know anything about this. These people are coming in from outside. There's no coordination whatsoever in either of your cases.
My campaign is not coordinating with anybody. I don't know who those individuals are. I know apparently what their interest is, however, given by what they've chosen to put out.
All right, so
what
lastly,
their interests are, are lies and misstatements and slander against me and the women who are running for county council in Delaware County.
And we agree. We agree that it would be illegal if those things were to happen in coordinating with the PAC.
That's correct.
In this case. And so if that's the case, how do each of you feel about receiving benefit from that kind of ad? Each of you benefits from money that comes in that you may not be asking for. Let's assume you're not asking for it. But you're benefiting from it potentially. Maybe not. Maybe the reaction will be different. So if there are ads saying vote for Stolzheimer or ads that say vote for Copeland, and they're coming from outside, should you stand up and say, stop that, go away? Let Delaware County decide this? Neither of you. Well, maybe you've done that. That's why I'm asking. Have you done that? No. Okay. We'll move on.
Can I answer two?
Yes.
There's not been a single negative ad run by any other...
Negative or positive is what I'm saying.
Let me finish saying that, okay? There's not been a single ad run in my race that hasn't been paid for by me or from the Delaware County Democratic Party. Not true.
All right. We will move on with one more ethical question. Candidates, please explain how your office, now or in the future, would be ethical and transparent in terms of assistant DAs, outside employment, or they're seeking elected office. Mr. Stolzheimer, will you please start?
Sure. So what I've made a campaign pledge is that we're going to adopt the policies that we work very well in state government, both on ethics. We want to make sure that everybody who works for the district attorney's office actually follows the law. County code requires every employee of the district attorney's office to work full-time as a lawyer for the DA's office. So if you want outside employment and it doesn't conflict with the job, you will be granted it, but you first have to come and ask permission from the head, the executive in charge of the DA's office. In terms of political activity, I don't believe that assistant district attorneys should be holding a local elected office, and I don't think they should be running for a local elected office, because I think that under Pennsylvania law, the district attorney's office is supposed to be a quasi-judicial office. We don't want assistant district attorneys with a political agenda in a courtroom prosecuting, making decisions about cases. What we want is everybody working for one thing, and that's justice, for fair justice for every single person in the courtroom.
Ms. Copeland.
Thank you. We have assistant district attorneys, as I've indicated, and Jack obviously has talked about as well, that actually have to have second and third jobs. Sometimes those second and third jobs are positions, such as solicitorships, such as working hard to actually earn extra money. That's what happens when they want to have families and raise families and still yet contribute to justice in our courtrooms. Every single one of our prosecutors in our office who has a second job, that doesn't mean they don't do their job full-time in the DA's office. They do that plus more. To sit down there and suggest that people shouldn't have some other political office because their communities matter to them, because they want to be leaders in the communities and that they want to be a voice that is important, is sad. It basically doesn't trust our prosecutors to do the right thing, and we have never and are not driven by politics in our office. Every single thing that they do upstairs in our courtrooms is valuable and necessary and has nothing to do with other jobs.
Let's move on. Ms. Copeland, will you please start this one? This is from the audience. What will be the policy of the district attorney's office on communicating with victims and, in the case of deaths, families of crime victims, to provide open lines of communication regarding the identity of those who may have been involved in the deaths of those victims? I guess the import I get from this, or what I infer from this, is that basically there may not be, in some people's views in the county, always enough adequate communication from either local law enforcement or the DA's office with crime victims in terms of information about the case that may be ongoing. That's what I take from this.
I am a big proponent of Marcy's Law, and I assume that is predominantly what that is talking about. And Marcy's Law is a law which will be on the ballot on November 5th, which will allow our victims to have constitutional rights, which allows them to actually have a voice in the courtroom. It will require, it will mandate a change in the Constitution which gives them rights. Currently, we have a Bill of Rights here in Pennsylvania which allows our victims to be heard. But there is no consequence if they're not notified of hearing dates. There is no consequence if people fail to inform them of when the defendant is going to be released from prison. I have seen what happens day in and day out across Commonwealth offices and the DA's offices, what happens when the victims aren't notified. So Marcy's Law would give our victims that statutorily and constitutionally mandated right, which would have consequences if it were violated.
Mr. Solsheimer, you can obviously, I want to ask you about Marcy's Law, but the question itself, it may have been about that, it may not have been. It didn't mention that in there. Did you want to address the question as you interpreted it, or do you want to talk about Marcy's Law?
Sure. I think open lines of communications with victims are critical to successful law enforcement. And I do support Marcy's Law, and I think that we need to make sure that we balance the scales of justice as much as we can, giving victims whatever constitutional protections the legislature deems appropriate.
And I want to pick up on that for both of you. You both support it, but there are people who are very well-meaning, and they say that it's just written too broadly and that there could be opportunity for unintended results or abuse violating someone's constitutional rights in overprotection of the victim in some cases. I take it neither of you thinks that's a serious concern?
I don't think that's a concern that should be that we as prosecutors should be concerned about, and I don't think that's a valid concern. I believe that Marcy's Law would allow our victims a voice which would be mandated with consequences if it were failed to be complied with.
Mr. Stolzheimer, same thing?
I think the intent of Marcy's law is to balance the scales of justice, both for victims and defendants who both have constitutional rights. I do think that there is a problem with the current referendum. I know there's a lawsuit right now by the League of Women Voters because Marcy's law is actually very complex. It gives a whole series of rights, and I think the ballot question on the that's going to be on the ballot is somewhat misleading. So I'm not sure if we're even going to get to vote on it November 5th. I haven't been able to follow where the court is on this, but I know that there are some serious questions about the process that we're going through to make this a constitutional amendment.
For both of you, as district attorney, some people believe it's important, this is from the audience, to be an administrator, but it's also important to be a trial lawyer. How many cases have you tried in front of a jury, Mr. Stolzheimer?
Well, first of all, I was a prosecutor for about 6.5 years. A lot of that time I was doing other work for the office as well. So when I was a federal prosecutor, I was recruited to come in and help set a program throughout the Eastern District of Pennsylvania, which was the U.S. Attorney's priority, called Project Safe Neighborhoods. When I was in the DA's office, I had the opportunity to do dozens of bench trials. I did 4 jury trials. When Kat Copeland was still an assistant district attorney busting college kids for 2 joints on college campuses somewhere, I was before a federal jury after having gone before a federal grand jury to bring the charges and successfully argued and convicted violent offenders in some of the worst neighborhoods of Philadelphia.
Ms. Copeland, do you need me to repeat, or you're fine? Okay.
I noticed Mr. Stolzheimer didn't really answer the question. I have tried hundreds of cases. I have personally prosecuted over 4,000 cases in Delaware County alone. Believe it or not, they weren't I have never tried a personal use marijuana case. I have tried murderers, I've tried rapists, I have tried homicide defendants, I have child pornographers.
I'm sorry, I don't want to interrupt, but for sake of clarification for someone like me, when you say tried, are you talking about all forms of prosecution? The question was specifically about in front of a jury.
Every single one of those have been in front of a jury, absolutely. And most importantly, I believe Jack in Delaware County tried 3 cases, and I believe not any single one of them was a felony offense. As the district attorney, you should have the experience of being a prosecutor and know what you're talking about. As a federal prosecutor, I have prosecuted for 6 years, and during that time, I tried numerous trials, including a 3-month trial. I believe far more than Jack has ever experienced, but I appreciate his attempts.
I get a rebuttal.
Go ahead. Both of you have some 30 seconds available.
So 2 of the last 3 district attorneys, Republican district attorneys at Delaware County, have never tried a criminal case before they were appointed by the Republican machine that appointed her district attorney as well. I don't remember her telling Mike Green that he wasn't qualified to be district attorney when she was working for him, and the machine appointed him. Second, as district attorney, she hasn't tried a single case. You're not really a courtroom attorney when you are the district attorney. What you are is the chief executive of a department, a big department, $10 million budget, over 150 employees. And that's where you really should look at her record, because her record as an executive of this department for the last 2 years has been abysmal. She has spent over $100,000 of taxpayers' money on back scratchers, billboards, nail files, everything to get her name out there as a campaign item to get her elected to office. I'm going to use my 30 seconds.
Well, we just did. I'm sorry, maybe you didn't hear me, Mr. Stolzheimer. I said 30 seconds for that one. I'm sorry if you didn't hear me. And since you were mentioned, if you want to take your 30 seconds, which you haven't done yet.
Absolutely. I have been a prosecutor, and I know how to try cases, and being the district attorney isn't contrary to what Mr. Stolzheimer says, administrative in the elites. Day in and day out, we make decisions which affect people's lives, and literally are life and death decisions on some instances. If you haven't tried a robbery, if you haven't tried a homicide, how would you know what is the right thing to do? To suggest that I have spent money improperly is abhorrent and disgusting, number one. And number 2, contrary to what Mr. Stolzheimer alleged, which is spending taxpayer money, I have spent forfeiture money doing what I'm supposed to do, which is being a prosecutor and creating means by which our victims can get in touch with us. Specifically, we spent money on reusable resources for our senior citizens. At a rate of 4 cents per senior citizen in Delaware County, we have given them the means by which to contact the DA's office, and as a result, solve crime day in, day out.
I feel that each of you wants to say a little bit more, and I mean a little bit, please, just for time, not because of
She
time.
also spent $450 of asset forfeiture money to take her chief county detective to a night out at a political dinner at Harrah's Casino in Chester. She also spent $11,000 of taxpayers' dollars to take her top staff to a golf resort in Annapolis, Maryland last year so they could hang out with the same Republican judges that they see every day in the media courthouse.
And the final
record
word,
is
I'm
abysmal.
sorry, sir, the time is up on that one, and just the same amount of time, final response, please, on this topic.
Now, unsurprisingly, little of what Jack says in this regard is even actually factually true. It is disappointing that the individual who wants to be the chief law enforcement officer in Delaware County is so liberal with the facts and incorrect so frankly very often. I haven't spent as the district attorney a single dime on taking people places. Contrary to that, talk about free trips. Jack, on his before he left his last position,
Yep.
Thank
he
you very
spent
much.
plenty of money.
Thank you both. Now, all right, so this was just the rehearsal, and we'll go on for another hour. No, so unfortunately, we're getting very close to the end. We want to make sure that both the candidates have time for their final remarks. And again, going in order of the coin toss that the campaigns agreed to before we began this evening, Mr. Stolzheimer, will you please deliver your 2-minute closing remarks?
Sure. So I think you've heard there's a wide variety of difference between me and my opponent today. She is the appointed Republican district attorney from the most corrupt political machine in Pennsylvania. This is time for a change. This is going to be a historic election, ladies and gentlemen. The way this machine has held power for 140 years in this county is through delivering bad services for a lot of tax money, and by taking care of a small number of people who get no bid contracts and no-show jobs. What it takes to make that happen is a district attorney who will turn the other way of the corruption in the courthouse and try to talk about other things like whatever's going on in Philadelphia. The Democratic Party this year, we're offering the voters a historic change. The 3 women I am proud to be running with, Elaine Schaefer, Christine Ruther, and Monica Taylor, are the face of change in Delaware County. They're going to bring open and transparent government equally for everybody. The 4 people I'm running for with Nusrat Rashid, Kelly Eckel, Rick Lowe, and Stephanie Klein, are going to be fair and independent judges, not going to take orders from Republican headquarters. At a time when the rule of law is under attack in this country, we need an independent judiciary. And ladies and gentlemen, if you are willing to give me your support, and I am humbly asking for your vote, not just for me, but from our entire ticket, I can promise you this. You're going to have a district attorney who cares about Delaware County, who grew up here, who has a family here, and wants to make sure that all of our communities are safe as possible, and also that everybody, single person who comes into our criminal justice system has the same shot at fair and equal justice. So I can promise you this. I'm not just going to talk tough on crime. I'm actually going to be smart on crime. We're going to bring the best practices from around the country to fix our cash bail system, to get rid of the private prison, to reinvest those proceeds into reentry programs and diversionary programs that are going to make communities safer and give people, the 70% of people who come into our criminal justice system with addiction and healthcare issues, the help they need to give you the best deal as a taxpayer. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Stolzheimer. For the 2-minute closing, Kat Copeland, please.
Thank you very much, audience members, for your interest tonight in tonight's debate. I can agree with Mr. Stolzheimer on one thing. We are vastly different candidates. We are a candidate who has no experience, and we are a candidate who has 27 years experience. The difference is between individuals. I care about our victims. I care about violence in our community. I care about making sure that guns stay out of the hands of convicted criminals. And I have shown that I do so not today, not yesterday, but by 27 years of dedication of doing this day in and day out. It is all I have dedicated my entire life to. just since I took office in January of 2018. And let's be clear, I took office because our Board of Judges opened it up to all Delaware County lawyers to put their name in the hat to choose. If you would like to be the DA here in Delaware County, put your name in the hat. And you know what? I put my name in along with about 25 other lawyers in Delaware County. And you know what? Not one of them voted for Jack Stolzheimer with good cause, because he has no experience, as opposed to me, who has a vast amount of experience. And as a result, I was selected by our Board of Judges, not any politician. I note that when Mr. Stolzheimer spoke today, he said the number of times he mentioned Republican and Democrat was countless. Today isn't about being a Republican, and the choice isn't about being a Republican or Democrat. The choice is about experience, caring, and having a proven record. And I have that time and time again. Since I took office in January of 2018, I created an anti-violence task force which has reduced homicides in the city of Chester, one of the most dangerous neighborhoods, by 38%. I have reduced aggravated assaults in that neighborhood thanks to my task force of over 69%, and robberies by the similar amount. Please consider who you vote for and recognize there is a stark difference.
Thank you. Round of applause for both our candidates, please. To all of you, thank you. Thank you very much for caring about Delaware County. Thank you very much for intending to vote and encouraging others to do so, and in a civil way. Thank you. Have a great evening.